Now here are your hosts, the one and only Ted Stank and Tom Goldsby.
Hey everybody.
Hey.
Thank you, Brian. He promised. I didn't hear the intro music. What was? I couldn't hear it, so I'm upset.
It was Top Gun.
Was it Top Gun?
Yeah.
Was it Bruce
In my
Springsteen
head.
doing a version of Top Gun?
I think it was. Springsteen cover.
All right. Well, hey everybody. My name's Ted Stank, co-executive director of the Global Supply Chain Institute and co-host of the Tennessee on Supply Chain podcast. Here with my longtime co-collaborator, Tom Goldsby. Tom, hey.
Good afternoon, all. Yeah, we're coming to you live from the Fall Supply Chain Forum here in downtown Knoxville, Tennessee. I think for the podcast listeners that'll hear this a little later, you need to understand just the vastness of what's in front of us here, right? I mean, we've got a room full here in the Marriott Ballroom. I wanted to get the wave going maybe right before this session, but I restrained myself. But maybe
Did you all
we'll
know
get
that this used to be the east wing of the Marriott, and we tore it down and put a ballroom in?
Bump. Oh, hear the groans. Audible groans from the audience with
no
that.
gold.
There's not.
Hey, who's this seated in between us?
So, I'd like everybody to welcome my good friend, retired Navy Rear Admiral Kevin Sweeney. I'm going to tell you a little bit about the roles that Kevin has played over the course of his career, and it's incredibly impressive. But more impressive than that is that he and I have been friends for 47 years, met each other when we were 18-year-olds as plebes at the U.S. Naval Academy.
That was 1978, if you can't do
I'm
the
doing
math.
the math on that, so yeah. Okay.
1978. By the way, in this vast room, we have another classmate of ours, class of 1982, Steve Klemenczyk. Where are you, Steve?
Yeah, Steve.
So there's three 1982
Wow.
U.S. Naval Academy graduates in the room.
That's incredible.
So Kevin is joining us today. Kevin brings us an incredible background. He's led teams in some of the toughest situations imaginable. He was commanding officer of the USS Cole after it was hit by a missile in the Persian Gulf. So he became commanding officer as it was coming back from the Gulf and going through reconstruction. I remember talking to him when he was CO. It was a pretty amazing time. He also has the greatest title that I've ever heard. And I'm gonna change it a little bit because I think it makes it even cooler. But I remember when he got this, I went to his change of command ceremony. He became commander of Carrier Strike Group 10. So it meant that he was commander of a carrier battle group and all the associated ships that went with it. I want to call it Carrier Strike Force because that kind of sounds like Star Wars to me. It was like, what was that admiral's name that had the head of a fish?
I've never seen
in
the show.
Star Wars. Anybody remember that guy's name? Anyway, I'm kidding around too much. He went on after that, after his retirement for the Navy, to serve as Chief of Staff to the Secretary of Defense James Mattis in the first Trump administration. So Kevin spent 2 years very close to the pulse of what was happening in the White House. I think you told me the other day that you probably went to the briefings in the Oval Office daily. Since then, he's advised major private sector organizations on national security and supply chain risk. He's on a number of different boards, including the Airbus U.S. Space and Defense Board of Directors. So, Kev, great to have you with us.
Thanks, Ted. Great to see you. Tom, good to meet you.
Thank you
as
so
well.
much,
Yeah,
Kevin.
no,
This is
thrilled to be
tremendous.
here. Yeah.
I have to say, if you're reading the program, I was going to sit this one out. And last night during the reception, we had some good conversation on that. And then we took it to trivia where we continued our winning streak, thanks to Kevin's help. This guy knows world geography, as you can imagine, right? But you invited me to join. Thank you very much for being part of the conversation.
That's
and
good.
I'm like, okay, I'm not, a military guy. I think I shared with you that I came within a signature of going Navy OCS. The recruiter actually completed the application. He's like, all you got to do is sign. But the idea of sailing under the polar ice caps for 6 months at a time on a sub just didn't really appeal to me. But I'm wearing my Navy jacket
Go Navy.
and some Navy shoes today, Navy belt. So I think I'm going to try to fit in with you guys. Try to
More
hang.
than either of us.
I'm going to try to hang with you guys today. But
Navy lost in football last weekend, so we're not too happy.
all right. Okay, we'll try not to dwell on that. But again, just tremendous experience, and boy, we need it. right now in the world of supply chain management, just to try to make sense of, are we going to see the other side of this?
We are.
Okay, that's a good place to start perhaps. How do we get there, maybe, is where we want to take the conversation.
So, first of all, I'm thrilled to be here and thrilled to be in an environment associated with a university. Great vibe in the room yesterday. Last night you kicked off, and then today as well. I sat in a couple of the other presenters. It was excellent. A couple of comments first from me. I looked around this audience. I suspect we have a number of veterans in the audience. Folks associated with veterans,
Let's see,
family.
show of hands.
Show of
if,
hands.
Veterans.
Yeah, I mean,
Okay.
it's a big deal, and next week is Veterans Day. Actually, it's not about sales at a furniture store. It's about celebrating veterans and their families. So hats off, and thank you for your service as well.
Yeah.
So, I mean, a quick background for me, as Ted said, both Naval Academy grads. I never intended to stick around the Navy past my 5-year commitment. Back in the 80s, I will be honest, it probably wasn't a lot of fun to be on ships in the Navy. And my intent was to get out in '89 and go ahead to grad school. I started applying to MBA programs.
UVA.
And, yeah,
You're gonna go to UVA.
And then I ended up working with some great folks who said, hey, the Navy's got a grad school out in Monterey. You go get a degree in finance and move on. I did. And ended up going out to California for a couple of years. And I said, I'm 10 years in, I'm probably going to get out again. And then all of a sudden, you just end up working with fabulous people, great opportunities. So I stuck around. And then, for a surface ship guy like myself, and Ted was early on in his career when he was in the Navy, the peak of your career, you strive, about 18, 20 years. And if you're lucky, you've done okay, you get selected to be a captain of a destroyer. And I was slated to take command of USS Cole, DDG 67, home ported out of Norfolk, Virginia. And I was wrapping up October of 2000, 25 years ago. I'll bring that up again in a second. Wrapping up my training, I was supposed to head overseas and take command of the ship on deployment in Bahrain, about halfway through a deployment to the Middle East. And 25 years ago, 3 weeks ago, we had our remembrance ceremony for Cole, October 12th. They had been attacked. We lost 17 sailors, another 29 severely injured. Cole came back, 18 months later, rebuilt. So I went from having command of Cole, supposedly in the middle of the Middle East, kind of a combat environment, never know what's going to happen operationally. The ship did get attacked. It was in Yemen Harbor, refueling when it was attacked. And my entire experience was not what I expected as a captain of a ship. For the next 22 months, I was a captain of a ship that was being rebuilt in Mississippi, where it was originally built. The crew was removed, and the crew was up in Norfolk, Virginia. And then over time, we started reassigning the crew over time. And then, boom, what happens next? 11 months later, 9/11 happens. And then we sort of accelerated in the Navy to bring a new crew back together. And we left 18 months later, returned back to Norfolk, Virginia, started the basic cycle of training and readiness for a ship. Back in those days, a DDG cost about $1 billion. And we rebuilt the ship at about a cost of about $245 million in 18 months. It was incredible. So again, I mentioned the remembrance ceremony. 25 years later, seeing the families, former crew members, it's just so moving. And it's amazing the impact an event like that happens on those families, but the impact it had greater on the Navy at large, and quite frankly, the country, because it wasn't realized until really September 11th, 9/11, that we were under attack, from in a kind of a terrorist environment, that those wars carried on for another 20 years. But again, as a CEO of a ship where you're prepared for war and being overseas, to now interacting every day with a ship being rebuilt in a shipyard, for me personally as a captain, they don't train you for that. They don't train you for how to sort of try to, one, put a ship back together, two, interact with your crew that just went through the most horrific and traumatic event of their lives and losing 17 shipmates. And then, as it turns out for me, I think it was roughly 31 separate family units associated with those 17 sailors. And as you get to know the families, every individual in the family units certainly dealt with the pain of losing their sailor differently. And it was just, for me, again, as a young 41-year-old CO, there was no playbook. And it's tough. I mean, and it was so rewarding, demanding in a sense, a great learning experience, the highest honor of my career, quite frankly, obviously being the skipper of the Cole after the attack and rebuilding and bringing the ship back. And when we did leave at about a crew of 300, I think we ended up having about 29 original crew members on board when we sailed back to Norfolk. By the way, the ship today is at sea. It's operating. It has deployed, I think, 4 times in those 20-some years, back into the Middle East as well, and doing great. And the ship was in port 3 weeks ago when we had remembrance ceremony for the crew. So it was impressive as heck.
So Kev, what leadership lessons did you take away from that? You said there's no playbook, right?
No, that's fabulous. Military, in business, you hear things called black swan events. You just can't plan or prepare. And actually you can't, except you have to be, you position yourself where if something does happen that's different, you're not formally schooled on, okay, how do you deal with it? And for me as a CEO, as I said, the ship is down in Mississippi, we're in Norfolk, the crew's in Norfolk. Over time, there's no plan when the ship was going to be completed. 9/11 happens. It's an accelerant for the Cole itself in a good way. I was never prepared to deal with now, national, international media. Again, interacting with the family members over time. Some wanted nothing to do with the Cole. Some felt very attached to the Cole. But every unit really did deal with it differently. And a completely different focus. You're rebuilding a new crew, and you're bringing the ship out. You're worried about safety, job number 1, and 2, long-term, turning the ship over to the next captain, who ultimately did deploy after I left. And you just have to. It was incredibly also impactful for my family. Nothing is easy, and it does impact families. That's why I mentioned, for the vets in here, it's not just the veterans, it's the families. So every day was a learning experience. Every day was something different for me professionally as the CEO, and every day you just had to kind of keep focus and have a vision of where we're getting. The Cole was going to come out at a certain date. We're going to be ready to go back to sea. We have to operate safely. We have to get back up to Norfolk. It was a big deal for Big Navy, as well as the families and the crew of Cole itself. And today, 25 years later, it's the same attitude on the ship. It was fabulous. I visited a captain on board, and the attitude is there, the history is there, the commitment's there, and it's just a great feeling.
Yeah. One of the things I've observed, I've certainly never been through adversity like that, right? But one of the things I've observed over time, and I think most of you that lived through COVID in your organizations and in society in general, I think adversity like that tends to bring out the best in people. When we all realize that there are really high stakes involved here, everybody just kind of rolls up their sleeves and goes to work and does things. I've seen your companies do amazing things in the spring of 2020, summer of 2020, that your organization was never prepared to do before. And I bet you saw that in
We did.
spades.
One, obviously, with the crew and the entire support structure actually had the Navy as well. The Navy was dealing with this as well as, Commander Sweeney is the captain of the ship and the crew. I will also say, and it just does tie into supply chain, and the ship was built in Ingalls, Pascagoula. At the time, it was part of Northrop Grumman. Today, it's part of Huntington Ingalls. They did a fabulous job. The commitment out of the organization, the commitment out of the workforce, the dedication of the community around us down there in Pascagoula was fabulous. And really a key to why we came out on time and, quite frankly, better shape than when the ship went in, as an operating destroyer. Yeah.
Well, let's shift gears a little bit. Times are different now, right? We've passed 9/11 and COVID's over, and business today is pretty mundane and boring, and there's not a lot of disruption going on. Kev, you have been at the heartbeat of national security policy, national defense policy. What is your take on the geopolitical landscape today, particularly vis-a-vis how it impacts supply chains? Because you're still living that.
We are. I am on 3 corporate boards, an industry association board for microelectronics, advisor to McKinsey's aerospace defense folks. So every day I am involved with certainly aerospace defense companies and a few other things. I would say right now it is a time of change, and you all see that. And it's maybe the catalyst in the U.S., of course, is a new administration. It's November now. And how we are, and this administration is taking this country, whether it's tariffs and trade policies, whether it's national security focus. We are, no kidding, focusing now on the borders here, if you will. We're focusing on the homeland. Back in 2017, the first Trump administration, when we were in the Pentagon, the big shift was leaving essentially the global war on terror and focusing on what we called really major competition of China and Russia, a focus on Asia Pacific from a security perspective, and a transition, a shift, huge increase in the budget for the military, a focus on readiness, a lot of atrophied over time. Now you fast forward, new administration with the Biden team in the middle here, there's a refocus on homeland security, the borders, South America, and the challenges are unique. And if you're in industry, and my perspective from being a board member is, there's a lot of unknowns right now. The impact of the tariff issue, quite frankly, we've been pretty pleased across the board as far as costing and the impact of what we've been doing to date. We don't know how it's going to carry moving forward. The impact of the budget, the U.S. budget. Here we are, day 36.
New record, by the way.
Yeah, of a budget problem and a government shutdown and the impacts it has every day, not just to the military, which the focus, but it's to everybody in the federal government. Whether you're furloughed, you're worried about being furloughed, you're not being paid, the impact to your family, your impact of planning, but it also impacts industry. Everybody's and at least what we see strategically, it's a pause. I think Friday, the Secretary of War, Pete Hegseth, is going to be meeting with key industry leaders and kind of roll out some massive changes to federal acquisition as it for defense and the Department of War. We'll see how that plays out. At the same time, the competition doesn't stop overseas, and the supply chain concerns that we have, particularly I'll tell you one at Airbus and others, we're all competing. We're building satellites right now. We're competing with many companies for the same limited assets available in the supply chain. And we're also focusing on what we call assured supply chain, because we can't have anything fail when it's up in space or elsewhere, long term. I would just say, and concurrently what's happening in Europe, right? There's stress on the EU, there's stress on NATO. We have two wars going on, Ukraine, Russia, you got a war down. Still, we may be in a pause right now. We'll see how it plays out, Israel, Hamas. That is all impacting kind of where does defense industry, at least, what's going on? Munition demand going way up. We know that's happening. There's a focus on shipbuilding out of the president and the EO signed back in April. Where is that going to take us long term? And really, what's going to happen with the budget in the next 2 years?
Yeah. So where do you see? Do you have a crystal ball? You can kind of tell us what do you? I mean, obviously not specifically.
No,
but
I do.
Over the next couple of years,
that's a great
what do you
question.
think?
I do see this. We learned a few things at the two current wars, particularly Ukraine. Russia war here is all the modeling we had in the military for years about consumption of weapons has changed. We realize and appreciate that the usage of weapons in today's environment is going to go like this. You see what's happening at sea with the Navy in particular, in the Red Sea. We're shooting down drones with multi-million-dollar missiles because that's what we have right now. So the cost equation is out of whack, but also the quantities and the inventory is out of whack. And so there will be a continuous focus on, one, building up munitions, two, a focus on new technology, hypersonics, autonomy, really taking it beyond just drones, but obviously at sea, underwater, and the larger drones that we call basically collaborative combat air that will start coordinating and operating with manned jets as well. So the demand signal is not going away because the threat is not going away. Yeah, and that's not a good news story, but it's a fact.
Talk about that. Talk about, again, we all live in this global world. We all have suppliers that are all over the globe. What do you see coming down the pike geopolitically? Yeah. Is there going to be any stabilization out of Europe?
I think Europe, I do think, is waking up to the fact that they are going to be much more responsible for their own national security. NATO is still there. NATO has been a blanket, but it really has been a blanket that the U.S. has kind of paid the bill for many, many years. And the focus on NATO that the Trump administration has done the first go around, the second go around, isn't new, as a matter of fact. I mean, we've been talking about it for many, many, many years, but really had been little action to kind of be the catalyst for investment out of the NATO countries. Throw in the EU, what is happening in Europe now. They realize that they have to step up financially, and it means a big shift in their budgets. And then on the other side, in Asia Pacific, every day that goes by, and I sat in here this morning to listen to Mitch, I'll make a comment, I'll build off of something he commented about, but the Chinese every day, they are just growing regionally, and then ultimately their goal, and it's no surprise, this is nothing hidden, is to ultimately be a global power and have the global system sort of underneath their standards and their rules. And I think a little bit of what we're doing in South America is actually tied to that right now as well. So the stresses are there. The question is, are we committed and we positioned, one, from the supply chain, two, from things like rare earth minerals, that's a piece of the supply chain. There is a focus on that right now, but also just the manufacturing capacity here in the U.S. I look at it from a microelectronics, electronics perspective that I'm involved in, and we just don't have the capacity, nor do we have the ability to turn around very, very quickly and to build that out if something goes wrong in Asia Pacific or elsewhere for that matter.
And so what is your thought then in terms of building those capabilities? I was hoping you all might distinguish ships versus boats for me, but let's talk about ships that you all use. Do we absolutely have to have that shipbuilding capacity here? Do we need to be able to build these vital pieces of equipment?
Well, I think it's twofold on shipbuilding. It's both, kind of commercial side as well as the military side. It has completely atrophied, as you know. I mean, essentially the shipbuilding commercial side in the U.S. is focused on essentially, offshore coastal vessels going out to support, local trade movement, going out to support oil rigs, offshore wind support, things like that, barges up and down the Mississippi, you name it. And we have just over the years, commercial large ships built overseas. We do a few here. Jones Act is a piece of that. I don't think we want to get in Jones Act, but on the military side, we also need to expand capacity. But again, you can't do this overnight. And if you see the thrust is to encourage outside investing, we have South Koreans right now investing in a Philadelphia shipyard. We have commitments from other companies around the shipbuilding companies around the world. We just, I think, made an agreement with a Finnish company to build 4 new icebreakers for the Coast Guard. Building out that capacity takes years and years and years, and it takes a lot of CapEx, quite frankly. And so I think the administration also looking for third-party private equity investment, co-investment, if you will, into our needs here in the U.S. It's pretty significant. Yeah.
So I'm curious, you serve on some boards, advisory capacity. Given your vast experience, given your perspective, I'm curious, what do those boards, what do those corporate leaders look to you to provide consent and advice?
No, I think, particularly in the aerospace and defense industry, having people, I always look at it from a corporate board perspective as well as from the C-suite, you want to have complementary experiences and expertise. And I think what folks like I bring, at least to a corporate board in particular, is the expertise of experience, kind of you where I was an end user of many of the products that are, being built, if you will, and being consumed, if you will. So that's one piece. 2, you understand how the government works, you understand how the federal government acquisition process works, you understand what we call the interagency, and of course we all have great relationships, inside the government, outside the government. So I think there's a broad gap that we help fill, quite frankly. And of course you have the same absolutely fiduciary responsibilities as any other board member, but we also bring leadership, we bring just a different set of experiences and background that folks who come up through on the commercial side just don't have. Yeah. At a senior level at least.
Hey, Kev, let's talk China for a while. Tom and I follow this futurist named Peter Zeihan. I think we talked about Stratfor before, right? Yeah. Peter Zeihan came out of that Stratfor family. And he's been saying for years that in the not too distant future, China is going to spin apart, mainly because of their demographic situation. shrinking, population shrinking at a dramatic rate. You don't see that a lot in policy. I mean, I think that most of our policy initiatives look at China continuing to be this power, this global competitor, if you will, strategically. Do you give any credence to the notion that China is going to have to confront in the very near future this demographic crisis and might spin apart, and what would happen if?
Yeah, I give a little credence, except maybe from a temporal perspective. Short-term versus long-term in sort of our society, our perspective, I think is a lot different than in certainly the culture of China. They are taking a very, very, very long view. They're patient yet persistent, if you will. I look at what happened and is happening today still in Hong Kong. The focus on Taiwan is real. It's only a matter of time. I don't know, and I don't think it has to be or will be necessarily kinetic. I think the last thing they want to do is destroy an economy that they want. 26 million plus, ethnic Chinese that are in Taiwan. It is democracy. I think here in this country, unfortunately, there's a lack of knowledge right now. Is it democracy? Why would we get involved to the point of military action? Say lose soldiers or airmen or sailors, have a aircraft shot out of the sky, potential ship speeds. I mean, how do you connect the dots to the American public right now is a concern there as well. But I think when you are a communist society and you're controlled by the Communist Party, they have many advantages that we do not have in this country as a democratic society. Everything from the free press to freedom of choice. Their industry is supplemented two ways, right? It's one by the government, two, they're pretty damn good at stealing intellectual property from the rest of the world, They don't have to invest in technology. Mitch made a comment this morning about the advantage that we have in technology is key if we do end up having some kind of a conflict with the Chinese. It's that, because we're not going to outbuild them right now, but most important, and more importantly, quite frankly, is the fact that they don't have the experiences that we have operationally, our military, their experience. They can build aircraft carriers today that replicate us. They're building the capabilities to operate like we do, but they don't have 100 years of operating off an aircraft carrier around the world. They don't have those experiences, and you can't steal that. You can't replicate that by stealing intellectual property. But over time, they will continue to get better, but they're not war tested. And it's a regime in the sense that subordinates and lower, they don't empower anybody to make decisions. Everything's centrally controlled, just like the Russians, quite frankly. A different model, but the same concept. The key to our success and Western militaries in general is we empower everyone in the chain of command, if you will, to make decisions and do what's right. The quality of our training is world class. That's where they still lack. But I think the timeline is we just have a different view, I think, than their culture.
That's a really interesting point. Right?
Yeah.
Our perspective is think about how our public corporations run, right?
Yeah.
Every quarter is what quarterly earnings, et cetera. Yeah, interesting point. So great point here, by the way. Since we are doing this podcast live, we are open to Q&A. It keeps coming up with the barcode up there if you want to capture that and put questions. We got a couple of good questions here. Any chance we could touch on the Belt and Road Initiative?
We can. I mean, hopefully most people know what it is, broadly speaking. We've been dealing with the Chinese presence around the world for years, and this is their trade initiative to build relationship with countries around the world. Essentially, in many areas, they'll bring money, but really what they do is they'll bring a little money, they'll bring a Chinese workforce, and they'll update or rebuild a port or a facility, and then ultimately they take control of it. And they'll build out bases and things like this. Third world countries mostly, who quite frankly need a boost economically. And so it's, in some ways, it's not brilliant, but it makes sense. How do you spread your influence around the world? Well, when you have the economic keys, it's very, very helpful.
But some countries have pushed back on it pretty hard.
They have, because at the end of the day, there's no
price
real
tag
work,
for that
there's no
investment,
jobs, there's debt, and basically you're turning over assets to the Chinese government at the end of the day.
Yeah.
Correct? Yeah. But they're out there, whether it's in Africa, South America, in Asia, it's there.
I'm gonna paraphrase this next question a little bit. It's about the amount of money we spend on defense, and can we shift that to manufacturing? I'm going to talk about the potential for a national industrial policy, particularly for industries that are critical to national defense.
There's a huge focus, and it started really, I would say, again, back in 2017 in a good way on the industrial base. It has dithered away, whether it's building ships, aircraft, new technology. The percentage of GDP that, and I don't have the numbers, they're easy to find though, that the military, controls, just going back 20 years, is just, we're down to what, 3% maybe, whatever the number is. From a peak of 10, 11, 12%.
Right.
Mitch mentioned this morning, there's little money going in R&E. There is little money to go into, the Navy, the broader military was the co-investor with industry back in the 60s in particular, 50s, 60s, and technology spun out of that. Today it's the exact opposite, and we're trying to rectify that.
Well, there was an urgency in the 60s, right? It was Cold War.
Yeah.
I mean, NASA, right? Why did we put so much money and go to the moon in, 9 years from when President, or 8 years from when President Kennedy said we were getting there? And I think people who didn't live through it don't realize that that was a military endeavor. It wasn't about putting somebody on the moon. It was a military endeavor.
And most people in this, I looked at the list of attendees here, if you will, and whether you're directly involved in supporting, anything in the federal government, quite frankly, but whether it's the military in general, if you were a part of the supply chain, if you were prime, you're tier 1, tier 2, or there's a dotted line in the logistics world, everything that we utilize has to be moved somehow, some way, across this country and overseas, whether it's, again, trucks and then planes and ships, food, everything ultimately does have to, we don't have another source of stuff, if you will, in the military. So everybody in some ways is part of that supply chain, incredibly vital as well.
Something we touched on earlier, day 36, and I'm going to call out Scott DeGroot. He co-hosted the last podcast 33 days ago, and we were trying to forecast how long the government shutdown was going to last. And I think we came down like 7 to 10 days, way overshot that. Hopefully there will be some break, but you've worked with the people and the personalities that we're talking about here. I'm not going to ask you for a specific number, but can you maybe talk a little bit about how and why maybe we should care about that? I mean, how are organizations and people affected by this shutdown?
Yeah, I think, again, from your corporate perspective in particular, pretty soon what's going to happen, and I say soon, like within a week or so, the impact to not just the military, but it's across the entire federal workforce. Whether they are going to be paid or not paid, they get furloughed. More and more organizations are just kind of stop working, quite frankly. And we have what they always call the critical organizations that no matter what. But you're seeing what happened in air traffic controllers, and now you see the Secretary of Transportation saying by next week, the impact isn't going to be just a few folks taking vacation. It's going to be pretty dramatic. That's one visible piece. But when you're inside sort of the Washington environment and you sort of see how the government functions, it is not functioning right now. And I think until the pressures build on either party or both parties to the point where this is a no-win, and ultimately my guess is, and it'll be the president stepping in at some point and moving this along, and we'll figure out, what went wrong and more importantly, what's going to change moving forward here. We have $125 billion coming out of the great big bill, particularly for defense, that is now stalled. That money is earmarked, but yet it's stalled out. We're not starting new programs. The impact across the board when you're, in a continuing resolution, but even worse when you're in a shutdown is nothing new is happening. You sort of keep the lights on as best you can and continue to do what you do every day the best you can. But as we move forward with new technology, new programs, new things, nothing's being funded. Yeah, so that's tough. It's tough. My guess, I'm inside people telling me hopefully this will be done by Thanksgiving. That's quite a few more weeks. Yeah.
Wow.
We'll see what happens.
Yeah. Hopefully all of you who are flying are able to get home tomorrow or get wherever you're going.
Beautiful time to be here in Rocky Top, though.
It is.
It's Chamber of Commerce says stay as long as you like. We'll keep the lights on here. Hey, Ted, do you think we ought to take another question from the audience?
Let's shift back to the leadership side. There's a question here saying, what leadership principles have influenced your success and growth in the Navy and the business world that you would share with emerging leaders?
You know, if I knew some of the things I think I know now through experience, I probably would have been a little better when I was younger in a sense. I would say, and this may surprise some folks, but hopefully not, the most important aspect of leadership, and by the way, for fun last night, I went, I don't know if I Googled AI, whatever. There's like right now 57,000 plus books in the Amazon system that talk about leadership, so you can't get this one wrong, right? Somebody will. But in reality, it's this. It's teamwork. And it's building teams that trust each other and work together at any level, any size unit, from a squad of Marines to a DDG ship of 300 to a strike group of 8,000 sailors and Marines to the Department of Defense. It's all about teamwork. I don't care. You can have the smartest supply chain folks, the best engineers, the whatevers. But if you can't build a team, work together for a common goal, and take that organization, whether it's a company or a military organization, forward, you're going to fail. You're going to fail. And people are not going to want to be around that kind of organization, and they're going to walk. The military is still an all-volunteer force. And I look at it from the industry perspective, and it's funny, you know, people, again, back to having a retired senior military guy on a board, like, oh, people just, and when we were in the Pentagon, well, just give orders, and people, it's a joke. There is no order given. There's guidance. Hopefully, there is articulation of a vision and goals. But you're dealing with people, and you have to have good relationships with all your key stakeholders. And that's the only way an organization, in my mind, is going to succeed. You know, when we were young JOs, I don't think that was our attitude or our experiences. But now J.O. is a junior officer when we first got commissioned at a school. But it's without question, that is the number one takeaway I have today.
And something else you mentioned earlier, which is empowerment. Yeah. I think one of the greatest things I took out of my leadership experience in the Navy is that I was a 24-year-old ensign responsible for super complex fire control computer systems and radars and stuff. And I had no training or basis other than the very highest conceptual level of it. And I had, one of my sailors was a master of science in electrical engineering. Yeah. And I said, how come you don't want to be an officer? And he's like, I don't want all that BS that you guys have to deal with. I just want to work on my computer system. Yeah. And I think the lesson for all of us is that we have incredible talent, incredibly talented people coming to work for us. And I think our job as leaders is to empower them and make them the best they can be. I am always shocked at leaders who feel threatened by people on their team succeeding. It's like, empower them, do everything you can for their success, and then sit back and bask in the light of their success, right? It's not a competition here.
And when those individuals are 10, 15, 20 years younger than you are as well. Age brings a little bit of experience and wisdom, but there are young superstars that, again, back to empowerment, enablement, support, mentorship. If there's one other thing I'll bring back, I think one of the biggest takeaways I've had professionally from day one is the power of mentorship, both to you as a mentoree and you as a mentor to folks, both formally and informally. A lot of organizations, companies, you have a formal HR process, you have strategies and goals for the year, you review a court, whatever. That's a piece of it, important piece. The other piece is, and particularly for the students here who are getting ready to go out into the professional world, you've got to seek out over time folks for guidance perspective that's non-judgmental, but they understand you, your background, the sort of the industry or subsector you're in, so they can give you quality advice. And this hopefully is a lifelong experience. I mean, I still interact with my mentors who are long retired, but are full of wisdom. And one of the most enjoyable things I do professionally, both in the corporate world as well as former military and folks from the civilian side, is mentoring, connecting, enabling, giving them another ear to listen to when they're making a career decision, and trying to balance, by the way, And one of the toughest balances I think we all can still have is, career demands and family demands. There's got to be a balance here.
We talk a lot about AI and how is AI impacting our lives. And I would say AI has the promise of doing crazy things later on, right? But initially, right now, for $20 a month, you can get ChatGPT, and so many of those mundane, boring administrative jobs that you're doing now that take you away from spending time with your people can be done by that AI tool. Use that AI tool to get all this mundane, boring stuff that you have to do every day and is keeping you away from your main job, which is building these teams and empowering your people, and get out and spend more time in your space with your people.
One of the most impactful things I ever watched, a couple of years back, some of you, age-wise, remember Jack Welch. Jack ran GE for how many years, and probably the most successful business leader at the time. And he was being interviewed up at Fairfield University up in Connecticut. And it was a great discussion, but it kind of turned negative of a bunch of questions at the time. The GE was being kicked in the shins a little bit about the long-term pollution in the Hudson River and what they're doing about it. And he finally turned and just said, the impression was, the feeling he's getting, like somehow business is bad. And big companies are bad. Big companies are made of everybody sitting in this room. It's about you, your families, it's jobs, it's building and creating wealth and a value system. And he was very frustrated by that. And the second piece, on the leadership piece, he was asked, and he said, if I don't spend 80% of my time with my subordinates and developing my subordinates, I'm a failure. And 20% of the time doing the mundane, the paperwork, what you have to do sometimes as a leader. But you got to spend your time with people. Back to the importance of relationships and people and developing your subordinates for the future.
And I think a lot of folks here are challenged by the fact that we've had reduction in force over the years, right? Yeah. So you're now probably doing the job that 3 other people might have been doing 20 years ago or 15 years ago, and I think that takes us away from spending the time with our people, right? Because you got all this paperwork you got to do, and it's like, geez, it's 5 o'clock. I got to get home to Sally's soccer game, but I still have all these reports I have to do and everything.
And be careful, leadership, that through paperwork, in a sense, a lot of folks are comfortable doing that instead of being with people, and dealing with issues and conflicts and everything else that happens. And I guess the second piece is, we've done this in different organizations throughout my career, particularly in the military. You know what? What happens next month? You don't send that report in. Nobody cares, right? Nobody gets feedback. Guess it wasn't necessary. But it's been done for 20 years, and everybody has to do it, right? So anyway, there's ways to do it, but certainly taking advantage of technology, AI, and other things will make that a little more effective.
I had a captain one time who I absolutely adored, who had a 3-drawer system. And everything that would come in, he would decide whether it was an A, that this is the alligator that's going to bite me today, we got to take care of it. The B was the alligator that might bite me tomorrow, and we'll worry about that tomorrow. And the C is, there might be an alligator out there, and he would put stuff in the C drawer. And he said probably 80% of the things he put in the C drawer never came up again. Never came up again.
Hey, Kevin, do you mind if we jump into another audience question? I'm going to kind of paraphrase a few of these. Just talking about the future of conflict, right? And you alluded to some of the demonstrative change we're seeing, the Ukraine-Russian conflict, where low-cost drones are being employed. And I guess there's maybe some question in terms of our military system of building tanks, ships. Big, we haven't touched on cyber, for instance, here, right? So where maybe our biggest threats do you think into the future, and how do we prepare to address those?
Yeah, I think space and cyber are the two areas that we are probably no longer at the competitive advantage we had in prior years, particularly with China. And those are so important, and they're so persistent. They are manpower intensive to a degree, and they're also technology intensive. But the advantage of a country like China has is they take what we call a whole government approach to everything. Every company has a responsibility in China to support the military in some way or fashion. Technology, intelligence, et cetera, et cetera. So for us to realize, particularly in the cyber domain, it's not just protecting your IT systems, it's protecting what's most valuable, your intellectual property. And ultimately, not brought down to your knees when something goes wrong. I've been involved in a company that went through a ransomware attack, and we were brought to our knees for about 10 days. I mean, everything, just, stop building, stop working on the line. We lost proprietary information. We lost data on our people. We couldn't send out purchase orders, and we couldn't send out billing, and all the things that you do, you take for granted. If you could do that to an aerospace and defense company, think more broadly to critical infrastructure and things like that. And we're talking about that every day now, but it does take investment. It takes investment, private sector investment. It takes, obviously, investment from the government as well. Big vulnerabilities, though, without question.
Pottery shot, Kev. One piece of advice. Remember, I told them their challenge was they had to come home with one actionable idea. What would your parting shot to this group be about what a takeaway?
Yeah, two things. I'll go back to my comment about the power of mentorship. Honestly, both sides of the coin, mentor, mentoree. And I think the other thing is probably one other thing that I've certainly appreciated and over my career now is you got to listen. You got to listen to people. Again, whether it's the junior individual in your organization or the old guy in the corner who's seen this 40 years ago, you got to listen and engage people and not avoid that. I mean, just listening to me and really listening, not just hearing, but listening to me is probably the most impactful tool that we have. And I think certainly early career days in the military, the perception is it's a very directive organization. Well, it is. And you'll be a failure if it maintains that way. So that's my two thoughts for today.
Perfect. Yeah. Thank you.
Great way to just a great way to kick off season 4 of the podcast, right here in our supply chain forum. Admiral, thank you so much
thank you.
For your service,
Admiral Sweeney,
for your time, your commitment. Really appreciate it.